Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
It's good. Saturday. Life is grand. How are you?
Doing great. I love my Saturdays. There's nothing better than sitting at home doing nothing, just like I did on Friday.
It's like how everyone says every day is the same now. Yeah, I mean, every day is pretty much the same now.
But that's, it is what it is. We make do, and also we make podcasts. So today's show is, we wanted to preview the freshman class from Ohio State. Yeah, we did have a signing day recap show or whatever, but now having seen how many practices is, Tom, just so people remember, how many practices of these guys have we seen with these early enrollees?
With the early enrollees, we have seen one entire practice. So I think my views on many of them have changed dramatically and really been refined.
And the guys who are enrolling this summer, how many practices of theirs have we seen?
If we're counting the time we got to watch them walk down a sidewalk into the Woody Hayes, one. Otherwise, zero.
Okay. All right. So we do have plenty to go on. So we'll just go through and we're going to little 2-cent overview of each of these guys, what we think. Will they play this year? Will they redshirt? Hopefully everybody plays, but let's start. We'll go alphabetically, Tom. So let's start with legend Cavazos, who we saw in the spring. He's intriguing to me as like a 6'1", 200-pound, listed at 6'1", 196 corner who is timed at like 4.40 at an ESPN combine, has a 40-inch vertical, great size for a defensive back. And I think maybe what intrigues me most is we saw him at the slot corner role a little bit this spring. And that might be like the perfect spot for him because he's big. He can hold up against the run, you would think. He's quick. He had an outrageous shuttle time at that combine as well. So he can maybe handle some of these quicker slot receivers. And he's long. I'm not saying he's Sean Wade, but his entire physical being and abilities might be pretty intriguing at slot, even though Kerry Combs says he wants to start everybody out wide. Seeing him in the slot was like, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, he's a really intriguing prospect. And I want to set some reasonable expectations here. You don't usually play at corner as a freshman. It's very rare to start at corner as a freshman. And he didn't obviously have spring practice other than that for the 3 spring practices they got in. He didn't have anything, any additional time. I think that's going to be tough for him to get on the field as a true freshman in the slot, but as a role second year, third year, absolutely, and maybe even towards the end of this year. I mean, you have had guys who got on the field late in their freshman year. Jeff Okudah started the Cotton Bowl, for example, as a true freshman in 2017, so it's possible. But Cavazos also is the kind of guy whose athleticism makes him potentially a impact player on special teams as a freshman. Maybe he's a punt gunner or someone like that, or finds some kind of role on special teams, 40-inch vertical, maybe he's blocking field goals, something along those lines. I think he plays this year, plays more than 4 games, probably doesn't redshirt, but, a role as a corner or a slot corner is probably a second or third year kind of thing.
Yeah, I could see the Chris Olave special teams role for him. That wouldn't be a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, I agree. He plays this year. Mookie Cooper, slot receiver for the Buckeyes, listed at 5'10", 195. The thing for me, with him, is he is different than anybody else on the roster. He has a different set of skills. He's one of those. Rondale Moore is the prototype that everybody will compare all of these smaller guys to. And when he's listed at 5'10", that means he's probably 5'8 3/4. But he's got that quickness. He's got speed. He did not play football last year as a transfer, had to sit out because he wanted to enroll early in the school. Like I think a lot of the Catholic schools, I don't know that any of them really let you graduate early. And so you'll see a lot of those guys have to transfer out as seniors so that they can graduate early. But he's at a position that is pretty loaded right now if we are to assume Garrett Wilson, Demario McCall are both there, CJ Saunders possibly. I don't know that they need more than 4 games out of him, but I do know he is different than anybody else. And if he shows something in those first couple of games, kind of like DeJuan Jones did last year, and yes, I am comparing Mookie Cooper to DeJuan Jones. And if you put them side by side, you might say, what are you doing? But where you find out, you know what? There's a role for this guy.
I hate it when you fall back into cliches like comparing Tate Martell-sized slot receivers to planet-sized offensive tackles. It's such a lazy, just overdone comp. I'm tired of it. Mookie Cooper was someone who, the first practice, the one we got to see, Mookie Cooper was back with the punt returners. He and Garrett Wilson and DeMario McCall, I believe, were the three guys back there returning punts. So he's someone that they see as a potential impact player on special teams. I could see him in, if they're up 50-0 on Bowling Green in the third quarter, maybe Mookie Cooper gets to go back and return a few punts in the in kind of garbage time. I don't expect him to get on the field this year on offense very much, but he's someone that you pick your 4 games where you're going to be up by 1 million points. Give him a chance to get a few snaps on offense in the fourth quarter. Give him a chance to maybe return a few punts or a few kicks potentially, and sort of see what you got. But yeah, between the depth chart and the fact that he didn't play last year, that's going to be pretty tough to get on the field this fall in any kind of a meaningful way that would make it worthwhile to not redshirt.
Yeah, I also think a redshirt wouldn't be a bad idea considering there is no slot receiver in the 2021 class. And so then maybe you've got a fix there. Let's go to Jacoby Cowan, who enrolled early, defensive lineman, listed at 6'5", 262. I think that 262 is a bit heavy because when we saw him this spring, he looked positively skinny almost. Not quite Javonte Jean-Baptiste. I'll get it one day, Tom. Not quite JJB levels as a true freshman, but I was surprised when you're talking about a guy who some thought would be possibly a defensive tackle. But when I saw him this spring, he's tall, he's got long arms, he's still, it seemed like maybe he lost a bunch of weight so that he could put good weight on. But the path towards playing time for a defensive end on this year's team, for a freshman defensive end, there might not be enough snaps for 4 games, let alone anything beyond that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a number of the defensive linemen kind of in pretty quick succession here, and the answer for all of them is, well, there's a really stacked depth chart above them, and they probably need a year with Coach Mick to build up their strength a little bit. And in Cowan's spot, I mean, I think you're right. I think he did lose some bad weight with the intention of putting on good weight, and he does not look like a defensive tackle now. He may be someone that they envision as a defensive tackle, at least like a 3-tech a year or two from now, but you probably need to put, if he's down at 240 or 250 now, from that listed 262, you've got to put some muscle back on there, and that is not something that happens overnight, especially when you have not been able to work with Coach Mick for a few months. So, yeah, he is almost certainly a red shirt, but he could be like Jaden McKenzie, where he gets to play a little bit. Jaden McKenzie played a few games last year, but was hurt. I mean, that's probably a lazy comp as well because they're both defensive linemen for North Carolina. But sort of get on that field and maybe play a couple games when they're up by 50 points in the fourth quarter. But yeah, don't expect any real meaningful playing time from him this year.
And we'll come back to Josh Fryer, but let's just continue with Ty Hamilton and Darian Henry Young, the other 2 defensive linemen. All 3 of these guys were thought as possible. The tweeners, basically, defensive ends or defensive tackles, depending on what they grow into. And Darian Henry Young was another guy who I guess lost a bunch of weight, and from what I've been told, he's going to have to put a bunch of strength on. And I think he's another redshirt guy. And at one point he was a top 100 guy, I think top 50 guy, and people were seeing him as more of a defensive tackle. I don't think he wants to play defensive tackle, so maybe that's been an incentive for all of these guys to lose weight because everybody, I guess, wants to be a defensive end. But yeah, I would see him redshirting as well. And Ty Hamilton, the bloodlines are, you couldn't speak enough of the bloodlines. And that's not because Devon Hamilton was a tremendous player right out of the gate, but just that he worked and got better every single year. And these 2 are brothers, and Ty Hamilton is his younger brother, listed at 6'3", 260, but who knows what he's actually at right now. It's hard for me to doubt Ty Hamilton, even though that's with the understanding that, whatever, it may take 2 or 3 years before he's in the rotation, but I'm not going to think that, he's not going to do it because he was the 960th ranked recruit in a 2020 class at whatever it is. That doesn't mean anything to me. I guess maybe I'm putting too much stock in his brother when I look at him, but Devon Hamilton was ranked very lowly as well, and he turned out okay. And then, you've got Larry Johnson to work with all of these guys. But I think they all redshirt. Get their 4 games, get their looks, get them some experience. But I think the strength aspect, that's something that's no big thing. That's no new thing for any freshman defensive end.
No, and I think outside of the just absolute total freaks, I mean, the Nick Bosas, the Zach Harrisons, the probably Jack Sawyer this time next year probably does not redshirt, but outside of those guys who are just the absolute top of the line, physically ready players, I think you just kind of almost assume that most of those guys are going to redshirt, especially now that they can play a little bit. You can play 4 games, get a little bit of a taste of the action, and still save that year of eligibility. It's smart to save it for those guys.
And now we move on to a bunch of offensive linemen. Are they recruiting these guys alphabetically, Tom? Is that what we're seeing here?
We skipped Julian Fleming, so we can go back to Julian Fleming after
Holy
the offensive
cow.
lineman. But yes. Yeah, they are grouped together pretty alphabetically. Yes,
I only skipped the number 1 ranked recruit in the nation according to ESPN. But let's go Julian Fleming first. Let's get this guy out of the way, okay?
Fine,
okay. Let's get this guy done with it and then move on to the more important people. Julian Fleming, 6'2", 200 pounds is what he's probably like 210 by now, and if he's anything like the rest of us, he's added even more weight than that, basically, in this entire quarantine time. But the thing, Tom, is he's not like the rest of us. He's ridiculously talented. In talking to his high school coach, he told me that he's never timed him into 40 because he's always fast enough. And the other thing, he never had a college coach, ask him for Julian Fleming's 40, which is. It's strange to me because they see him play and that would seem to be like, that's just a standard thing. It's like part of the questionnaire. What's his name? What grade is he? What's his 40? But this is a guy who loves to block, is just ridiculously productive as a receiver, catching the ball, a great teammate from everything that I've been told. And really, one of the other things is that this is a guy who has been given accolades and been getting offers since he was a freshman. And what his coach told me is like he's never stopped. He's never been satisfied by any of that. And if anything, he's just been driven by it because he knows that just landing an offer or signing somewhere isn't the goal. And there's so much more to that. And I'm looking forward to watching him play. He plays this year for me, Tom.
Yeah, I think he gets on the field somewhere. I mean, he's probably slots in at X. And that's a spot where there's enough question marks that he's probably going to be on the field at some point. And with all these wide receivers, don't assume they're going to be playing week 1 and making a huge impact week 1. But give it till mid-October, early November, he's probably on the field. I mean, you said he hasn't been timed in the 40. He was apparently timed in the 100-meter dash because he won it in the state of Pennsylvania in the PIA track and field championships. I also love his high school stats. His junior year, he had 78 catches. His senior year, he had 72. His junior year, he had 1,524 yards. His senior year, he had 1,582 yards. His junior year, he had 22 touchdowns. His senior year, he had 22 touchdowns. So he's fast and also apparently pretty consistent. So that seems good.
And 3 pick sixes and a punt return touchdown. And also played basketball. And, pretty good player. We'll see how it goes. And for me, just having him at X, it's the process of elimination, but also that's the quickest way for him to the field, assuming Jamison Williams is as good as we keep saying he will be. So let's talk about Josh Fryer as we begin our delving into the offensive lineman here. Out of Indiana, number 3 overall player in the state, 3-star guy. I think they need him at tackle, but that's a tough ask for, so many of these guys. Listed at 6'6", so he's got the height, but I don't always get so much hung up on the height because Jamarco Jones was listed at 6'5", was actually 6'4", and he played left tackle pretty well for Ohio State. So if you can do that, that's great. I don't get so much hung up on the height because it's more about the feet and the arms and that sort of thing. But I don't know that Josh Fryer will see the field this year, and I don't know that they need more than one or two guys on the offensive line to see the field. And certainly we've talked so many times about the second team offensive line, the third team offensive line at Ohio State, that there's enough guys already that I don't see Fryer playing any more than his 4 games that are allotted.
No, I would agree with that. I think that's going to be the answer for a lot of these offensive linemen. Now, this time last year, I would have said DeJuan Jones is definitely not going to play this year. And then DeJuan Jones played a bunch. So you never know. Maybe one of them gets on the field. But yeah, Josh Fryer and Jacob James, some of the guys we're going to talk about. That's just not an area where you're going to play a lot of guys as freshmen. And, maybe they get their 4 games in at some point and get a few reps. But yeah, the depth there is pretty solid already. That's a very tough place to get on the field as a true freshman, just from a strength perspective, from a technique perspective. A lot of these guys are coming from offenses that are, fairly dissimilar from Ohio State's offense. A lot of high school offenses are very run-based, and so these guys aren't necessarily as developed as pass blockers. You run into a lot of that kind of stuff. So yeah, generally the assumption should always be virtually every offensive lineman is going to redshirt. That's just kind of how it typically goes. And if you have a guy who does it, it's like, oh, that's a pretty big indication that, yes, this guy is probably on track for something pretty big.
And I know some people were talking about Fryer possibly as a center, so probably more of an interior guy anyway. No reason for him to be expected to play this year. So that takes us to Jacob James, another guy in that same boat, one of the lower-ranked guys in the class for the Buckeyes. In fact, the lowest ranked position player, number 849 overall, the number 55 guard out of Cincinnati Elder. I'm okay taking Ohio kids, but these low-rated Ohio kids who will develop. The thing that maybe provides more hope than most is that Jacob James and we'll talk about Trey Leroux in a little bit. These guys were offered really early. These weren't some sort of December day before signing day, like, okay, you've worn us down, we'll take you. Like, these guys committed pretty early, and we know once if Ohio State offers an Ohio kid, they do that knowing that kid's gonna pretty good chance of them taking it. So you better be serious with this offer, and they were. But Jacob James, he's in that same boat. No reason to play this year. Probably very few expectations that he will, other than the 4 games.
Right, yeah, you get him on the field. I mean, he's probably a little bit more developed as a prospect just because his dad is the offensive line coach for his high school, so he should have a decent amount of technique kind of already ingrained in him. But yeah, I mean, as with a lot of these other guys, I go back to last fall when we were looking at the first practice of fall camp, and all of the freshman offensive linemen were over like separate from the first and second team. And, and there were guys there, DeJuan Jones, Enoch Vamahi, guys who ended up playing and being solid players for the Buckeyes last year. And then Harry Miller was over with the twos. And it was like, okay, yep. Okay. That's the guy who is like head and shoulders above everyone else right now. Just because you are not starting the year as a guy who's working with the 2 deep doesn't mean you can't end up being a good solid player even later in that season. But yeah, I would say that Fryer, James, some of these other guys we're talking about probably will be in that group that are off with the other freshmen, kind of getting their feet wet, and don't expect. Do not expect very many guys to be on the Harry Miller path, is I guess what I'm saying.
Well, that's a great segue, because one of the guys who will be on that Harry Miller path is probably Paris Johnson, who was in this spring and is the number 1 offensive tackle in the nation, a top 10 player overall, and one of 3 guys vying for that open right tackle spot. For me, he'll be in the 2 deep pretty, I would think, based on there's not a lot of other tackles. And he's also a guy that they're going to want playing at the very least in 2021. So you better get him as much exposure as you can. And the level of shock that I would have if Paris Johnson redshirted would be pretty high. But Nicholas Petit-Frere, he redshirted as somebody who was ranked just as high. Now, Johnson doesn't have the same type of development that Petit-Frere had in terms of the weight, because Paris Johnson's already, he's probably 300 pounds right now, and he's always looked good with it. I expect Paris Johnson to be the one freshman offensive lineman who is with the veterans when the camp opens.
Yeah, I would say so as well. He's someone who the recruiting rankings, the highlight films, like it all looks like, yep, this kid could come in and be some kind of an immediate impact player for the Buckeyes. And you kind of hear from people who are inside the program that, yeah, it's sort of tracking on that path. And we'll have to see how the layoff and all that impacted everything. But he is someone who you very consistently hear people talking about how he has a great work ethic and is, a kid who just has put in the work for years and years and years and came to Ohio State ready to go. And yeah, he might not be a starter this year, but if you were putting together a 2021 Ohio State depth chart, I would have Paris Johnson's name as probably the first team left tackle right now if I was filling that out today.
Which takes us to another offensive tackle, Trey LaRue out of Norwalk, who is the actual lowest ranked offensive lineman or lowest ranked member of the class outside of the top 1,000. The number 91 tackle in the 24/7 composite, the number 43 player in the state, but listed at like 6'8", 355. A guy who has got tackle size. Does he have tackle feet? We'll find out. Is he Kevin Feeder or is he DeJuan Jones in terms of these huge guys who you take a reach on? And not that DeJuan Jones is a starter yet, but he did play last year and was pretty impressive. But graduated early, signed early, took part in the winter workouts. He's certainly doing all of the right things to get as much development as possible, but I don't see it happening this year for him.
Well, he was someone who came in, I think you said listed at 355, and I think by like a month in, he was down to like 330. I think he was a very much a Coach Mick project, and they're in the process of getting that work in. But yeah, you don't come in with that level of recruiting ranking and needing to be kind of physically rebuilt a little bit and immediately jump on the field as a freshman. That's probably a multi-year project, and that's fine. Like they don't need him this year. They have 5 very solid offensive linemen. They have 5 very solid backups behind those guys. You don't need these guys out on the field right now as true freshmen, and you don't want them out on the field as true freshmen for the most part because they're not ready. They need to be developed more physically. They need to have that technique refined, all of that. And so yeah, he's someone who I'm interested to see how he develops. He was the one who told us on early signing day or on national signing day, that he could do a split, which at 6'8" and 350 pounds or whatever it was. I mean, that's pretty interesting that you could do that at that size physically. So he's kind of intriguing athletically from that perspective. But yeah, it will probably be at least 2021, if not maybe spring of 2022, before we have probably a decent sense for where he really stacks up on that depth chart.
Yeah. Now we move to Cameron Martinez. He had the 9-minute highlight package of just touchdowns as a high school quarterback, a dual threat quarterback, but more of a running threat quarterback. Think Jalen Marshall type triple option guy who just runs around everybody and scores 116,000 touchdowns, I believe it was. But ridiculous highlights, except it looks like he's going to be on the defensive side of the ball. Certainly a possibility at H for the longest time, but now it looks like he's going to be somewhere in the secondary. And as I said before, Kerry Combs likes to start everybody on the outside. There's some concerns about Cameron Martinez's speed, so I don't know if that fits better with the corner, with the slot corner at safety. Is he one of the second safeties when they go to a too deep or a too high safety look? I don't know where he fits in, and I'm not sure anybody really does just yet. So for me, that means redshirt, but it could also mean, maybe he starts out on special teams and does some stuff there. But Tom, for me, I think they have to figure out what he is yet before we can, start putting him out on the field.
Right. He was not an early enrollee, so he has not had the months with Coach Mick already. He is, a little bit of a question mark in terms of where exactly he slots in there. Kerry Combs has not gotten to work with him on the field yet, so they obviously really like what they saw there. They really fought hard to get him in this class and keep him in this class because he did not sign on early signing day. He decided to wait another month after Jeff Hafley announced he was leaving to sort of figure out what was going on with the Ohio State defensive backs coaching situation. And, as with everyone, met Kerry Combs and went, oh yeah, this guy's great. I want to go play for him. So he turned down Northwestern. I think Northwestern would have let him play whatever he wanted to play. If you want to be quarterback, fine. You want to be left tackle, fine. I don't care. Come play. You want to punt? Sure. You want to call plays? Whatever you want. He ended up choosing Ohio State over Northwestern's offer of, you want to be Willie the Wildcat? Absolutely. But yeah, he is a really intriguing prospect just because that athleticism and, if you have the burst and you have the wiggle that he has that you saw in those highlights on the offensive side of the ball, that's going to translate to defense. So the athleticism is there to have a pretty special player, but yeah, there's probably a year of figuring out exactly where he fits best and the best place to utilize those skills.
I could see him being a solid punt returner, but they don't need him there either this year. That could be, Garrett Wilson or DeMario or Mookie Cooper, even though he's probably a redshirt guy. There's other possibilities there to return punts as well, but it'll be fun to see how he develops and what he becomes, because he does have that insane athleticism and the sixth sense of the awareness, I guess, the football awareness that is rare. He's got that, which maybe make him in handy as some sort of a safety. Mitchell Melton will go to next, linebacker, 6'3", 235, out of Maryland, who we saw him. We mentioned being able to see these guys practice on their arrival. He was maybe the guy that stood out to me most, just because of how big he was compared to, I think he was coming in with Cody Simon, and Simon is listed at 6'1", 218. He's not the biggest linebacker, but Mitchell Melton looked like a defensive end, standing next to him, and that may be where Melton ends up. But either way, if he's a linebacker or a defensive end, if you don't know what he is, then he's not going to play. And those two positions, there's really no room for either for a freshman anyway. So out of all of these guys, he seems like one of the most logical red shirts, just based on everything I've said and the depth chart that he would have to try to fight through once he figures out exactly what he is.
Yeah, I'm right there with you because, where do you fit on the defensive end depth chart this year? Nope. Where do you fit on the linebacker depth chart this year? I mean, they have guys who've been here 3 seasons who, this is their 3rd season, and they have not gotten on the field with any regularity at linebacker. So go ahead and take a redshirt season. I mean, unless he just turns into an assassin on kickoff or something like that. Yeah, I don't see them using a season of eligibility just for kickoff coverage. So yeah, take a year, figure out exactly where he is developmentally. But yeah, he very much jumped out to me. I had the exact same thought because Cody Simon's not a small guy. And Mitchell, it was just like, oh, there were a couple guys that I was like, oh, he's bigger than I expected. And yeah, Mitchell Melton was definitely one of them.
There is the thought, though, that Ohio State will be losing 4 linebackers after this year. So there wouldn't be a terrible thing to burn red shirts for the freshman linebackers if it means they'll have the necessary experience to then be in the 2 deep and possibly contend for a starting spot next year. It's just going to be hard to get those reps because you've got 7 linebackers who are juniors or seniors, and then you've got Craig Young and Tommy Eichenberg behind them who should get to play as well. And really, it's just going to be super difficult. Let's go to Jack Miller, quarterback out of Scottsdale, Arizona. Dealt with some shoulder injuries in high school, which is certainly a concern when you're already dealing with injuries in high school. So we'll see how that goes. He's healthy now. He was the first guy Ohio State got committed at quarterback for the 2020 class. Ryan Day was in on him very early, back to 20. Gosh, I remember Urban Meyer was still around. Jack Miller, I think, told Ryan Day at a Friday Night Lights, yes, I'm going to commit, but then he waited a few days or a week or so to announce it publicly. But we were at Friday Night Lights stalking the facility, and you could see, like, inside the atrium there, him and Ryan Day had a big hug, and everybody was happy. And then Jack Miller comes out. He's like, no, I haven't committed yet. And it's like, well, that looked like a commitment hug, as hugs go. But for me, Jack Miller and C.J. Stroud are both going to have to play this year, just because one of them is going, barring Kyle McCord taking the job next year, one of these two freshmen is going to be starting next year. So you've got to play them. We could go ahead and throw C.J. Stroud in now. These two guys have to play this year. That's, I think Gunnar Oak will be the backup, but you've got to find time. And you don't necessarily have to burn their red shirts, I guess, because I don't know how many more games than 4 a true freshman should be expected to play. But, you figure if you can get them each 4 and still save some eligibility, that would be the best course of action, even though expecting a quarterback to stick around for 5 years is, it doesn't happen. So there is that. But I think they both play. I would be okay with them both burning red shirts. I don't know that it's necessary, but you've got to get them enough enough reps to where you feel confident that you've done them a service this year.
Right. You want to have them prepared for 2021, and maybe you're getting them prepared for the end of 2020. Maybe they can be ready enough to be the backup behind Justin Fields by the end of the year, one of them, if they really take a step forward. But yeah, you have to have a little bit of an eye on the future. And for the same reason you're letting some of the younger guys play at all the other positions, like it's even more important at quarterback that you get some reps, you start getting used to reading defenses live and all of that. And so, yeah, I would assume that probably at least one of them red shirts, and I could see them basically going into every game and saying, you are our third quarterback today, and just, you could even alternate it if they're real close. And then you might be able to keep both of those guys, if Jack Miller is the third quarterback this week against Bowling Green or Buffalo or whoever it is, he knows he's got the whole fourth quarter or, whatever length of time that they're going to give him. And then you have some consolidated development time, but you maybe can preserve that red shirt. Because, I know you said that you're not likely to have those two quarterbacks on your roster for 5 full years, but you also, you're probably helping out the kid, whoever, if one of them ends up transferring or something like that, preserving a year of eligibility is probably in that kid's best interest if he's going to be transferring. So that's, you're maybe doing a little bit of a service to whoever ends up not winning the job if they end up wanting to go somewhere else, or you give, worst case scenario, if one of them redshirts and one of them doesn't, you have a year of eligibility between them, and they're no longer in the same class. So that wouldn't be the worst thing either.
And even though he did transfer, Joe Burrow was a 5-year guy who ended up being the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. So there is no shame in being a 5th year, having to be a 5th year senior quarterback. It's not like the NBA where people are like, why haven't you turned pro? I mean, sometimes there's plenty of reasons to stick around. And Joe Burrow showed that, he made the right decision. C.J. Stroud, and I know this isn't alphabetical, he has said that he wants to show people he's more mobile than people think. He was rated as a pro-style quarterback. We saw him in the spring having some pretty good success running the ball on the read options. Jack Miller's not immobile by any means either, but Stroud, maybe a little bit more of that, maybe a more live arm, and that's one of the reasons he was rated by maybe 24/7 as a 5-star guy. So, we'll see. That's for camp to determine which one of these guys. I do think they should be separated if they do decide that one guy will play more than the 4 games. I'm looking at the schedule, and you could see like Bowling Green, Buffalo, and Rutgers are 3 of the first 4 games. I could see each of those guys playing in those three games. But then you're going to need, like, will they play against Iowa? I don't know. At Michigan State, at Penn State, probably doubtful. Nebraska at home, maybe. Indiana at home, maybe. At Maryland, maybe. At Illinois, I don't know. As we said in the past, you just don't know about Illinois. So I don't know how many opportunities, which seems strange to say, there will be for blowouts. Obviously, Michigan. So maybe you're right, but yeah, it would be best to separate them, at least give them some options. And by separating them, you also have the thing like, say Jack Miller redshirts, CJ Stroud, you're going to tell Jack Miller, like, well, remember, after year 3, CJ Stroud can go to the NFL, and it becomes this thing like, then you'll have 2 years of starting, and then they both got 2 years of starting, which I think would maybe be the perfect situation if one of them starts in 2021 and 2022 and then goes pro and then the other comes in. But of course, Ryan Day is now recruiting quarterbacks at Ohio State, so there'll be Kyle McCord. There'll be a 2022 guy, a 2023 guy, and that competition will only get more difficult. Anything else on the quarterbacks, Tom, before we move on back to the alphabet?
Yep, let's go back. Let's talk safeties.
Lathan Ransom out of Arizona. We finally saw him arrive. 6'1", 193, looks the part. Is pretty big dude, not undersized. Looks, Tom, as good as a safety can look walking into a building with a mask on. I'm saying it, Lathan Ransom was that guy.
He was someone else I looked at. I went, he's taller than I expected. I don't know why, but he just. I mean, he's listed at 6'1", so maybe it's just he's not. He's a little on the thin side, and that makes him look taller. But yeah, he's a big dude, and he's someone who probably is going to take a year. Maybe he's a special teams guy this year, but that's not going to be a spot where he's probably going to be able to get on the field much this fall. So he's probably a likely redshirt candidate unless he's a special teams guy. Yeah,
he might be ideal down the road as a deep safety, but with Josh Proctor and Marcus Hooker and other guys. I don't know that there will be enough room for him, but then the safety spot is so up in the air as it is right now. He's certainly going to have an opportunity, but being a late arrival guy, that will be tough. Joe Royer, the tight end, 6'5", 225, out of Cincinnati Elder as well. Tall guy, lanky guy. Tight end, though, right now with Luke Farrell, Jeremy Ruckert, Jake Hausman, just those 3. It's going to be tough for anybody to join that. And Rashad Berry made it a foursome last year, but he was a fifth-year senior. And maybe if somebody can jump ahead of Jake Hausman, then you can get in there. Cade Stover is also in that mix, and I know to move him off of defense and make him a tight end, you would hope that there's a reason for that. And we saw him in our one spring practice. He looked like a pretty good tight end. And so right now, I don't know that there'll be a need for a 4th tight end, Tom, this year.
No, I think Joe Royer is very, very likely a redshirt kid this year. 4-star prospect, 5-star hair though. That is the best hair on the 2020 Ohio State roster by a decent margin. But yeah, 6'5", 225. He's someone who could use a year in the weight room, because he is someone who was a phenomenal receiver in high school. 70 catches, 1,258 yards, and 15 touchdowns. That was just last season. 1,258 yards receiving, 15 touchdowns. In the entire decade, has Ohio State had 1,258 yards from its tight ends? I mean, probably, but maybe not in the last 5 years. So, yeah, he's someone who could be a real impact player down the line. But yeah, that's not a spot where they need him, and he's someone who would benefit from a year of growth. He did not come in early, so yeah, he's someone who is almost certainly going to be a redshirt this year.
Which takes us to G. Scott Jr., 6'3", 207, wide receiver out of Seattle, who will almost assuredly be at the X this year with Jalen Harris. This is a guy who during camp season last year was blowing everybody away, nearly moved up to 5-star status. And I know Buckeye fans felt he should have been, of course, but he was also really, really good. And he's a strong dude. For me, like the comp is Michael Thomas. And that's just a comparison. That's not a guarantee or whatever. It's just, he's 6'3". He's an X. He can move the chains. He can do something after that. He is an end zone weapon. And for me, he plays this year. It's not a deep X group. So, I mean, he could, for me, the only thing like keeping him from starting is basically Jalen Harris, unless Garrett Wilson moves over. And maybe there's this whole thing, like if Jalen Harris doesn't do his part, do they move Garrett Wilson back, or is G. Scott and Julian Fleming and Jalen Harris together? Are those three like good enough? And we'll find that out. But he's certainly going to play this year.
Yeah, G. Scott and or Julian Fleming is in that 6 wide receiver rotation by middle of the season, at least, I would say. And it could be both. It just depends on how Jalen Harris is developed. And he was one of those people that I had on my list of people I was most interested to see this spring, because it was, this is kind of a make or break spring for him. And then we didn't get to see him. So we'll be interested to see whenever we do get to see them, to see how he's developed, because he is someone who could, be like we said, like a 400-yard kind of receiving player there at X, and that would be great. But if he's not, or if he hasn't really taken that step, or if G. Scott and or Julian Fleming are more ready to play immediately than we're thinking, then it's entirely possible that one or both of them grabs that starting spot, or at least one of those rotation spots there.
And now we go to Jake Seibert, kicker out of Cincinnati LaSalle, who is probably going to gray shirt. Right now, Ohio State is over. Assuming C.J. Saunders gets his 6th year, I think that would put Ohio State at 86, so he would be 87. Seibert would. So Seibert would. I'll edit that. Don't worry, Tom. I got you. There's also the fact that Ohio State has a perfectly good kicker and Blake Haubeil. It would be interesting, like something, if there's an illness or something like that, maybe that gray shirt gets ripped off. Underneath it is a red shirt. And like, nope, you got to get that one off as well. We need you out here to kick. So, I mean, there is certainly that possibility this year.
Yeah, you never know. I would assume if they're gray shirting him, they're going to have that decision made in August. So, because you have to be at 85 by the start of fall camp. So if he's not on that 85, I don't think he'll be an option to play this year. But yeah, you take a year and you work in the weight room. I mean, they've done this with a few other people. Rowan McCullough, the long snapper, took a gray shirt year. Todd Beckman took a gray shirt year way back when. Like this is not a super uncommon thing, especially for specialists. So yeah, they don't need him this year because you got Blake Haubeil. So take a year and just be congratulations, you're going to be the guy in 2021.
Remember Aaron Petrie out of Kentucky, the kicker who was seemingly, he may have been gray shirted like twice. I don't know. Ohio State just kept keeping him at arm's length. And then I believe he also had a red shirt in there as well. Kickers, you never know. They've got to match up with the timing of the previous kicker, and you don't want two on scholarship if you can avoid it. Cody Simon, we mentioned 6'1", 218, linebacker out of New Jersey. I see him on the inside. He'll have to add some weight, obviously, but he's an active dude. His highlights are impressive. He's fast. He's productive. But again, he's a linebacker at Ohio State in 2020, and there are 9 other guys ahead of him.
Yep, we'll see in 2021.
Somebody we will see in 2020 who is one of the he's certainly on my hype train. He may officially be on the Buckeye Weekly podcast hype train, is receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Rockwall, Texas, who even before we got to see him, it was clear like this dude was putting up ridiculous numbers. And yes, he's in a passing offense, but he is still making insane catches. making plays after the catch and looking awesome. And then we see him in person in that practice, and he was as good as advertised. He was catching everything, making difficult catches. He looked like Garrett Wilson the year before, like during the season. All of the best things you saw from Garrett Wilson, we saw on that day from Jackson Smith-Njigba. And it was outside, it was inside. And for me, that's why I expect him to be the number 2H by October 15th, maybe by August 15th.
Yeah, I am like deeply uncomfortable on a personal level about how much I'm expecting from three of these wide receivers as true freshmen, because one of my longtime axioms is don't expect anything from freshman wide receivers. But here we are. We're talking about G. Scott and Julian Fleming potentially being in the rotation at X, Jackson Smith-Njigba potentially being in the rotation at H. It's just, the thing with Jackson Smith-Njigba is, like you said, the highlights were insane. The stats were insane. He was doing it in the top division of Texas high school football. So he was a known commodity. He put up close to 2,000 yards as a junior. So it wasn't like he snuck up on people last year. Everybody knew who this kid was. This is Texas big school football. So you're going up against very good talent. And 13 games last fall, 104 catches, 2,094 yards, 35 touchdowns. That's a bunch. So, and it wasn't just that. It was, here he is making a one-handed catch. Here he is making another diving one-handed catch. Here he is making a leaping one-handed catch. Like, it just, and then when we saw him at practice, I think he missed one ball. I think there was one that he missed, and it was a throw that was probably like 4 yards out of bounds, and he still went up and came close-ish to making the play. So yeah, I am officially on board with the Jackson Smith-Njigba hype train on Buckeye Weekly. I can't guarantee he will be a huge player this year. I mean, you just have to have realistic expectations for what a huge year for a freshman wide receiver looks like. 300, 400 yards as a freshman wide receiver is a wow stat. Like, every once in a while you'll have a guy who puts up more than that, but I mean, if you get 400 yards receiving from a freshman wide receiver, that is like a mind-blowing number just historically for Ohio State. And I think you're going to get someone, at least one of them there. And if Jackson Smith-Njigba isn't there, it's because the depth chart at H is just so deep.
Yeah, and I see a similar year to what Garrett Wilson had last year, 30 catches, 432 yards, 5 touchdowns. But that came out wide. I wonder with the over-unders, like, I would probably go up to almost 40 receptions for Jackson Smith-Njigba, and that might be a terrible bet. But I see him being over 30, but then somewhere in that 30 to 40 range. But there's also, there's so many guys in that age. So he may not end up being that number 2 guy, sure. But for me, I just, maybe I'm being fooled. I just have really high expectations for him. And we've already talked about C.J. Stroud. Let's go to Grant Toutant, the offensive lineman, 6'7", 290 out of Warren, Michigan. Another option at tackle, perhaps, for the Buckeyes. Tom, not this year.
Nope. See also previous conversations about offensive linemen. It's 6'7", 290. He also missed a bunch of time last year. He had a shoulder injury that he missed a bunch of time in his senior season. So he's probably a little behind for that reason. And then also, he's potentially a tackle down the line. They're fine at tackle this year. So, take a year, start, work with Coach Bick, and we'll see you in 2021.
Let's go to Ryan Watts, the 6'3" corner out of Little Elm, Texas. I mentioned that I was impressed by Mitchell Melton on his arrival day. Ryan Watts, and you may have been gone at this point, he came in and he looked, he was, he looked more like Javonte Jean-Baptiste as a freshman than a corner. So he's 6'3", he's listed at 187. There's no way. He has to be close to 200 already. He's just a big, solid, well put together guy who had some pretty good moments when we saw that first practice. I believe he had an interception or two in coverage. I could see him playing. There's not a lot of corners on this roster, and the Buckeyes will be losing some. So I don't think it's a bad thing to get these freshmen playing for Legend Cavazos and Ryan Watts to both play this year. I think you got to see what you've got and hopefully get them up to speed as quickly as possible. So I think you play them and see if they can put some pressure on Marcus Williamson, Tyreek Johnson, those guys.
Yeah, he's not someone they need this year, but he's someone they're going to need next year because you're losing Sean Wade next year, Sevyn Banks, Cameron Brown, like anyone who is a draft eligible starter at Ohio State, you have to assume like, yeah, there's a possibility they're going to go to the NFL in a year. So you don't know how many starters you're going to lose next year, but it's at least one and maybe more than one. And Tyreek Johnson, Marcus Williamson, those guys are kind of question marks at this point. And I think Marcus Williamson's going into his senior year, if I'm remembering correctly. So, yeah, you're going to need Ryan Watts and Legend Cavazos to be somewhere in that, at least in that conversation for the starting job next year. And, again, realistic expectations for a second-year starting corner is, that is not your finished product. It is not going to necessarily look fantastic in 2021 with some of those guys, but you have to start doing the work in 2020 so that you can have them at least be reasonable options for 2021. So, exactly. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. Court Williams, our next guy, possibly a bullet. I guess that is what the plan is for him. He's playing some deep safety in the spring, but as we know from spring of 2019, the defense that you see there is not necessarily the defense you will see during the regular season. But for me, like good size, 6'1", 216, I believe he will end up at linebacker, but the fact that he's playing safety this year is interesting just to give him, or playing safety in the one practice we saw. There is, he has the athleticism to at least be considered that. But the most encouraging thing for me is what Ryan Day has said about him, and that's, he's going to be a future captain, and everything that coaches say about a player that almost has nothing to do with the way he plays. Those are guys that you want to put in the back of your mind, like when Mick Marotti told Urban Meyer before they were even playing that Terry McLaurin and Paris Campbell are going to be the guys who set your locker room up. And so Court Williams to me is one of those guys where don't expect necessarily anything this year, maybe some special teams, but down the road, don't be surprised if he's one of those guys who is leading the locker room based on what Ryan Day has had to say.
Yeah, and they like him on the field too. I mean, he's someone that people are pretty intrigued by as a player as well. So yeah, he is, in terms of being someone who is a captain and potentially an All Big Ten player at some point during his career. Like I think he would be on that list for me. But yeah, he does not nowhere that he could slot in on the field this year is anywhere they really need any immediate help. So yeah, he's probably a redshirt and or special teams guy.
Which takes us to the other Williams in the class, Mayan Williams, the running back out of Cincinnati, Winton Woods. Listed at 5'10", 225, Tom, but that 225 is no longer, if it's still 225, it's a very different 225 than it was in high school, as everybody has seen in pictures from Arrival Day and even before then. He's been sharing pictures himself because this is a guy who was carrying, I'd say, too much weight, and he would probably say the same thing. I think his Twitter account is something like Fat Boy or whatever. But go look at the Arrival photos of Mayan Williams, and to call him that is not a fat kid by any stretch of the imagination. He put in the work, and he looks like a junior running back, not a freshman running back.
Yeah, he's listed at the same weight as Master Teague, and he's 1 inch shorter than Master Teague. And Master Teague is someone who is built like a brick you-know-what house. So yeah, he is. Mayan Williams was probably the guy who won the walk into the Woody day in terms of like, wow, holy smokes, that kid has spent some time in the weight room in the last 6 months or so. So yeah, he's, and Ohio State is loaded at running back this year. You've got Trey Sermon, you've got Master Teague, you've got Marcus Crowley, you've got Steele Chambers. I mean, Damari McCall's in the mix there. So, how much is he going to get on the field this year? Probably not a ton. Maybe he has the Steele Chambers season from last year where it's, 15, 20 carries and 100 and something yards maybe. But yeah, he's someone who looks like I think there's a perception that he was just a we need someone. We didn't get the kid we wanted, so we need someone. So we'll just take this kid. He looks like someone who he has the work ethic and has been putting in the work to be something that's more than that down the road.
Yeah, and Tony Alford does not like that connotation or that insinuation that Mayan Williams was just a fallback plan, and he said he's good enough to play at Ohio State. Mayan Williams is hearing that as well, but there's no reason for him to play more than 4 games this year, which takes us to our final guy, Luke Whippler. I think the number 2 center in the class, 6'3", 280 out of New Jersey. And I know there's not necessarily maybe a lot of room or reason for Whippler to play, other than the fact that the Buckeyes will be replacing 2 seniors or two early enrollees after the season, and most likely Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis. Harry Miller will be moving over to center, so there will be 2 guard spots opening. I don't think it would be crazy for Luke Whippler to not redshirt this year, maybe do the Harry Miller plan, but that also depends on guys like Ryan Jacoby, Enoch Vamahi, who maybe a better way to put it would be the Enoch Vamahi plan for Luke Whippler. Did Vamahi end up redshirting, or did he play like 5 or 6 games last year?
I think he took a redshirt. I believe he only ended up playing in 4.
Okay. Well, even so, 4 is plenty for maybe a guy who then will be competing for a spot in 2021. I just know that the expectations are high for Whippler, but it's going to have to be at guard. Maybe he's the backup. I don't know if he's the backup center this year or not, even though Harry Miller is the actual backup, but like on the depth chart. But you could also be the backup on the depth chart and still redshirt, as Nicholas Petit-Frere did in 2018. But Whippler's future is at guard, and then maybe moves to center when Harry Miller leaves after next year.
Yeah. Boy, that's crazy. But yes, after next year, he could potentially leave. Yeah. You said that. I'm like, that can't possibly be right. But yep, that's right. Luke Whippler is, of all of the offensive linemen behind Paris Johnson, probably the second most likely to not redshirt this year, but he's still probably better than 50-50 to redshirt, maybe. He's, like you said, he could be a guard, he could be a center. They don't necessarily need him there this year, but if they feel like he's ready, go ahead and throw him out there and start getting him some experience, and maybe that's just 4 games worth of experience, and you can kind of keep that redshirt year and give him another year separation from Harry Miller. But yeah, I think there's I think there's at least a 30% or so chance that he plays enough that they don't redshirt him this year. But I would still probably, he's the second most likely to not redshirt, but he's still pretty likely to redshirt.
Yep, I'm with you. And that will do it for this when we planned it. Tom, let's go through the freshmen, 30 minutes, each one of them. So this is another outstanding 30-minute podcast. So we appreciate you guys listening. Anything else, Tom, before we close? Could there possibly be anything else?
No, I think we've subjected the good people to enough. Please enjoy your weekends, and and we'll be back next week with more. We promise.
We promise. That's a great way to end it. You guys all have a good one. Check out BuckeyeScoop.com and take care of each other.